You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 27th of February 2026 on Monocle Radio. Hello there and a warm welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Emma Nelson, and coming up on today's programme, Pakistan says it's engaged in open war with the Taliban in Afghanistan. What does this mean and how will this affect the region? Also ahead, a dialed-down display of firepower by Pyongyang marks a culmination of North Korea's ruling party Congress. Is Kim Jong-un sending a message that he wants to make up with the West? Plus the latest business news, courtesy of our man at Bloomberg, and...
There are moments in this where you're seeing a very complex social picture at a point at which the old world, the days of empire, are coming to an end.
Tate goes to Tokyo. The story of British art is celebrated for a Japanese audience. That's all coming up right here on The Briefing with me, Emma Nelson. Pakistan has said it is now in what it calls open war with the Afghan Taliban. Explosions were heard overnight in Kabul and Kandahar, and the Pakistani government says its armed forces are now, and I quote, firmly confronting any aggression. A fragile ceasefire had been agreed last October. So what's gone wrong? Well, I'm joined now by Lynn O'Donnell, who's a columnist for Foreign Policy magazine with an expertise in Afghanistan. Lynn, a very good afternoon to you.
Hi, Emma.
So before we start to examine the wider issues that have brought about this moment, do we know exactly what happened last night?
Well, it seems that the Pakistani military has launched airstrikes on specific targets inside Afghanistan, in Kabul, the capital, and Kandahar, which the Taliban call their spiritual capital, which is the centre of the Taliban's government. It's not clear what exactly was struck. The Pakistanis say military targets. People that I've talked to in the country say that it seems the presidential palace, which is in the centre of Kabul, was targeted, and another area of the city called Darul Aman, which is where a lot of the elite government people traditionally live. But it's there's a fog, of course, going on. The Taliban say that they have struck targets in Pakistan, including in Islamabad. People I've spoken to in Pakistan, including Islamabad, say that's not true. So now it's tit-for-tat PR as much as anything else.
And it seems to be tit-for-tat violence as well. I mean, some news that's breaking in the last minute or so is that Pakistan, having launched its airstrikes last night, were subject to retaliation, and Afghan officials are now saying that it's attacked Pakistani border troops in retaliation for these airstrikes by Islamabad, and a dozen soldiers have now been killed.
Well, we won't know what the real casualty figures are, especially those coming out of the Taliban, because the Taliban have always lied about those sort of details. But the fact remains that border between the two countries has been the subject of skirmishes and attacks for many, many months now. And the tensions have been escalating, and that the Pakistani foreign minister has said our cup of patience has run dry, was really only a matter of time.
When did it start to go wrong between Pakistan and the Taliban? Because the Pakistanis have given harbour to Taliban fighters in the past.
Not just fighters, Emma. They've given infrastructural and structural support to the Taliban for 20 years. When the Americans came in post 9/11 and pushed them over the border into Pakistan, the Taliban were harboured in cities like Quetta and Peshawar and Kandahar. They were funded and they were armed by Pakistani military and intelligence agencies and enabled to fight the war that eventually ended with the defeat of America and its NATO allies. So Pakistan thought that what it was doing was creating a buffer between itself, Pakistan, and India, its great enemy in the region, especially at a time when India was becoming the regional power. And it also thought that this was part of what it calls its strategic depth, essentially annexing Afghanistan as a province of Pakistan. But that didn't work out. As soon as the Taliban got into power, they turned around and said, "Thanks, guys, we don't need you anymore." And they've been pretty much on their own and getting more and more antagonistic with Pakistan ever since. And that has culminated in recent months, probably about a year, of the Afghan Taliban supporting militant groups on the other side of the border that are fighting for the overthrow of the Pakistani government.
There are wider implications here, aren't they? Most notably in the region and relations with India.
Well, there are. I think India has quite astutely allowed the Taliban to become part of its foreign policy outreach over the past year. The Taliban have been allowed to take over Afghanistan's embassy in New Delhi, and India's intelligence agency is regularly and probably rightly accused of also supporting militant groups inside Pakistan, like the Baluchistan Liberation Army, for instance. So there is that destabilising support that the Taliban have, but also both sides, Pakistan and Afghanistan, have administrations that are very, very weak at home. And so this enables them to distract attention away from the problems that they have on their own patches. So Afghanistan is terribly poor. Things have got worse for its people under the Taliban's rule. It's brutal. They're hungry. They're going nowhere. Terrible unemployment, etc., etc. And this enables the Taliban to show themselves as fighting on behalf of a unified Afghanistan and deflect attention away from its own inability to rule the country. And on the Pakistani side, if you have an external enemy, this happens all over the world and throughout history, you distract attention away from incompetent governance, high unemployment, an economy in a downward spiral, and 3 other wars domestically that they're not dealing with either. So everybody wins, except the people, of course.
Lynn O'Donnell, columnist for Foreign Policy magazine, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing. You're listening to Monocle Radio. Let's have a look at the rest of today's headlines. Here's Anita Riotta.
Thanks, Emma. China has removed 9 military lawmakers from its national parliament. It's the latest sign that President Xi Jinping's purge of key defense establishment personnel continues to widen. Roughly 100 officers have been ousted since 2022, with critics describing the move as a tool to purge political rivals. Budget carrier Scoot is set to take on Japan's 2 main airlines and its own parent's flagship, Singapore Airlines, with a new route serving Haneda Airport in Tokyo from Sunday. The move expands Scoot's Japan network to 45 weekly flights, offering shorter ground transfer times and stronger domestic connectivity. And finally, ticket sales for the cinema broadcast of BTS's upcoming world tour have sold out in South Korea in minutes. Live viewings of the group's Goyang and Tokyo concerts will be broadcast to almost 4,000 screens across 80 countries. The K-pop powerhouse's biggest comeback tour could become one of the world's highest grossing runs, rivaling Taylor Swift. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Emma.
Thank you very much indeed, Anita. And we head to South Korea now, but not to talk about BTS, but to talk about North Korea and to Pyongyang, where the time is 21:06. Because every 5 years, North Korea holds its ruling party Congress. Declarations are made, threats are issued, and by means of a climax, there is a parade. Tanks, hypersonic missiles, you name it. Everything that screams, come and have a go. But while the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un promised to strengthen the country's nuclear weapons programme, this year's nighttime display was more muted. Well, I'm joined now by June Ha-Park, who's correspondent at Korea Risk Group based in Seoul. A very good evening to you.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Now, just explain to us what has been happening at this ruling party Congress. We have these two narratives, don't we? We have Kim Jong-un promising that the nuclear program will be strengthened, but to all intents and purposes, this parade was missing some key elements of aggression.
Right. So the Ninth Party Congress had just finished just yesterday, actually the day before on Thursday. It was reported yesterday in state media. It was a week long, about 7 days. It was cementing the leader Kim Jong-un's ambitious military modernization agenda. He permanently rejected ties with South Korea and left the door open to talks with the United States, but only if Washington accepts North Korea's nuclear status, which is what they've been pushing for, to be recognized as this nuclear power. So he told some, I think it was about 5,000 delegates within the Congress for 7 days. And within the last day, he said that the country's irreversible nuclear arsenal will never be up for negotiation, while also unveiling a new 5-year weapons development plan that emphasizes AI-powered unmanned attack systems, anti-satellite weapons, and electronic warfare platforms designed to paralyze these enemy command centers in the ROC and in the US. So effectively, the military parade, it did not show any of these weapons, as you mentioned. It only showed a number of military personnel marching in front of Kim Jong-un and his daughter.
So just to explain to us that I'll pick up on that point about how he would make peace with the West. How often do we hear such dove-like words coming from the mouth of Kim Jong-un?
Well, this was something that he talked about in November 2025. Kim Jong-un effectively said the same thing when he came out and he said, look, the door's open for future talks with the United States, but as long as you drop the denuclearization framework. And effectively, Kim Jong-un was stating that he will never give up his nuclear weapons. The North Korean regime will continue to develop its nuclear arsenal. And effectively what it's saying is that the message, it puts responsibility for tensions squarely on Washington, while also justifying potential future weapons tests or military demonstrations if diplomacy stalls, as it has for the past couple of years, since Hanoi in 2019. So I think right now, as of the moment, Kim Jong-un's largely carrying on with the rhetoric that he showed last year towards the United States. He's still open to talks with the United States. He's still saying that they're friendly. There's no reason that they can't be friendly. But of course, it's a conditions-based offer.
Indeed. And we have this conditions-based offer. So I do apologize for interrupting you.
Not at all.
Run us through the reasons for why he is taking this narrative lead, because is it a question that North Korea, he would quite like North Korea to be admitted to the West's playground and find itself part of that sort of section of the world? Is it because North Korea needs help and needs support and sanctions to be lifted, or is it simply because he might sense a bit of a chance with Donald Trump?
I think it's the latter. I don't think it's something that he's trying to look for a chance to get into the West. He already has a significant player within the West, and that's Russia. He's sent troops to the Ukrainian front. He's had his own troops have had battlefield experience in Kursk. There's not really an incentive for him to usher himself into talks with the United States and take the diplomatic risk. And also for the United States as well, it's a diplomatic risk in themselves. Their current diplomatic stance is focused on China, Russia, Iran, what have you. So I think at the moment right now, he is just trying to level the playing ground. He's saying that, look, these talks can happen if you want them to. But as I said, it's a conditions-based offer, and it's not really something that he's showing any desperacy in.
One figure who has begun to appear increasingly frequently alongside her father is Kim Jong-un's daughter. Tell us about what she is now being seen as in terms of the role that she could be occupying.
Right. So we've seen that, South Korean intelligence assessments that suggest that, succession planning remains considerably sort of much more higher level now, with her daughter now, or his daughter now in the picture. But of course, his 13-year-old daughter, believed to be named Kim Jue, did not attend official events until the post-Congress parade. It does sort of contradict the speculation about these succession plans or senior appointments. So the absence of these anticipated announcement, it does reveal some sort of a strategic restraint rather than a policy drift. So Kim's decision not to designate his daughter for leadership roles, despite her high-profile appearances since 2022, it suggests that it still is a very distant force of, succession plans or whatnot. Kim Jue, she also falls short of the Workers' Party minimum membership age of 18. So I don't think that we can entertain ideas of her becoming the next successor as of yet.
June Hyde Park in Seoul, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing. 12:13 p.m. here in London. Let's get the latest business news. Ewan Potts is from Bloomberg. Good afternoon, Ewan. How's it looking where you are?
Hello, Emma. Yes, going very well, thank you. Got some exciting news for you from the TV world.
Well, not so great if you're Netflix, but good news if you're Paramount. Is that right?
Yes, indeed. It's been a long-running mini-series which has really gripped investors over the last few weeks, but Netflix has dropped out of the fight to buy Warner Brothers Discovery. The withdrawal of the TV streaming giant leaves the way clear for rival bidder Paramount Skydance to go ahead with its $111 billion offer for the historic Hollywood studio. Netflix saying that at the price required to match Paramount's latest offer, the deal is no longer financially attractive. Instead, Netflix is going to keep on investing in its business, including about $20 billion this year on films, TV shows, and other entertainment offerings. Now, Netflix had originally inked an $83 billion deal to acquire just the studio and the streaming businesses of Warner Brothers back in December, but repeated counteroffers from Paramount for the entire company kept the auction open. The takeover fight has been contentious both in Hollywood and in Washington. The bosses of Netflix and Paramount both making trips to the US Capitol this week to meet with lawmakers. And a number of industry players have expressed their concerns about Netflix owning such an important movie maker. Their worry, or one of their worries, was that Netflix wouldn't be interested in cinemas releasing films straight to its TV service. So they will be pleased. And another group who will be waking up happy this morning are Netflix shareholders. They were not at all keen on this expensive purchase, and the stock's been tanking in recent weeks. Netflix shares up almost 8% this morning in pre-market trading.
It's an interesting configuration. Is there an interesting approach that Netflix clearly couldn't see enough money being made from Warner Brothers, and obviously Paramount came back with a much bigger bid. But that idea that we didn't know what Netflix was going to do. You talked about the fear that films would not actually see the cinema screen that they were destined for. But was there a sense that there was a fear of scraping out of lots of the Warner Brothers resources and the things that actually made the company as great as it was?
Yeah, well, it's such an iconic name, of course, isn't it? With a massive history, a list of famous movies as long as your arm. So it was always a sort of an emotive takeover. And I think that the concern for Netflix shareholders, of course, is that producing things is a cost to the business. And Netflix already invests a huge amount of money in making loads of output. Turn on Netflix and there's always new things to watch. And it's done that whilst becoming a hugely profitable business as they've grown their subscriptions around the world. Netflix makes a lot of money, so shareholders clearly keen on that. So the idea of shelling out $100 billion for sort of more production capacity was something that shareholders are really not keen on. And as I said before, lots and lots of players in Hollywood also worried about what Netflix would do to the business as well.
Okay, finally, quick look at the final trading day of the month. How have the markets been in February?
Yeah, Emma, for so long, the only trade in town was buy America. Well, in recent weeks, the winning mantra has been pretty much buy anything that isn't America. Asian stocks on track for their best February on record as investors pile into the region's companies supplying the AI infrastructure build out, up about 7% this year. Korea's Kospi, the standout, up a crazy 20% in February alone. Korea's Kospi dominated by Samsung and HK Hynix, two of the three big companies around the world which make memory chips. You may have read about the shortage of those and the rocketing price. If you want to buy a phone soon, something to worry about. Investors have really been flocking to the companies which underpin the build out of AI, the picks and shovels, if you like, of the supply chain. And European shares also had a very solid month. They're heading for their longest monthly winning streak since 2013, eighth month of gains. Worries about the level of AI spending in America has really been driving a rotation trade into other regions. And it's been a great month for the FTSE here in London. The FTSE is dominated by old school fuddy-duddy companies like energy firms and mining stocks. And that is just the ticket when you're looking to buy boring.
We like stability. Bloomberg reporter Ewan Potts, thank you so much for joining us on the line as ever. You were the briefing. Finally, on today's programme, we head to Japan because the National Arts Centre in Tokyo is hosting a major exhibition from the Tate collection here in London. It explores the dynamic evolution of British art from the late 1980s to the early 2000s. And Monocle's Ryuma Takahashi heard from Gregor Muir, who's director of collection at Tate, when he was in Tokyo. And they talked about the British art scene of that era and its connections with Japan and the wider world.
YBO Beyond is essentially an exhibition curated from the Tate's collection of British art from the late 80s and 90s. And it is taking a view of the landscape of British art across a pretty big field. So it'll have certain artists that you'll recognise potentially, Damien Hirst, Tracey Emin, for instance, but it's a broad scope. And it takes in many of the artists without whom those artists, they just wouldn't have functioned without being in a place where art was being produced in a very vibrant and exciting way. So the show is trying to take you on this journey through the sort of mindset of that time. What was London like, for instance, and what were we all going to do with the world we lived in those days?
Thank you. So, what was the background to the British art scene at that period? Why did British art from that period become so influential around the world?
As you walk through the show, hopefully a sort of subtext about how diffuse, diverse British culture was, that we are, in this exhibition, showing as full a range of artistic production as possible. It's not just a certain set from Goldsmiths. You'll find artists in there like Lubena Himid, or you'll find the most amazing videos and films that remind us of the very difficult tensions that existed in the country, race relations, difficult relations with the police, riots, the sense of illness and the way in which the world was momentarily obsessed with the AIDS epidemic. So there are moments in this where you're seeing a very complex social picture at a point at which the old world, the world of colonial trade and industries, the days of empire, are coming to an end. So it's a hinge point. It's a moment where we're moving, as it were, as a nation into a privatized arena. We're looking at greater corporate freedom and financial freedom, while at the same time you're seeing artists suddenly create their own opportunities. They are very noticeably more entrepreneurial in this period.
As we are speaking from Tokyo, were there any connection between the British art scene and Japanese art scene back then?
I think everyone found a way out of that 80s, post-80s period. I mean, we talk about a global recession and a global property recession. And I think the difference then to subsequent recessions was as was visible and shared around the world. It was a point in which there was a kind of economic collapse, and that resulted in the closure of shops for real. I felt with Japan, there was the sense of perhaps you approached it in a similar way at times, because of course you took on the same project in terms of independent spaces and artists becoming very invested in making art that was very now, that was very of a moment, and sort of met the contemporary art languages that you were finding in other world centres, such as London and New York. So I think that the drive here is interestingly similar. And we were also at the same time terribly poorly travelled. And I would just add that, you know, many of the artists who came through in this period just did not have the financial means to go beyond London for a time. But then they did suddenly. And then they travelled with these shows that went around the world. And they were often supported by the British Council. And they made a difference to all our lives.
Thank you. And looking at today, where do you think the art world is heading now? For example, in the UK, Japan, and globally?
I would need to study it more, the Japanese scene at present. But I think there is much more of a sense of unison across the art worlds. You know, there was a moment when I found going to New York in, let's say, the late 80s was a real eye-opener. And the art worlds of London and New York were very different. They were easy to relate to, and you could see how they could get along, but they were different. And at that time, the sort of move into globalism and essentially a globalized art world brought some sort of standardization with it as well. And we see that in the art fairs, for instance, and in the way in which the art market itself became more worked out, more resolved. It became much more simpatico. It joined up. I think now the bigger question is probably going to be on a global level, how does art make itself a presence going forward? How do artists change? How do they modify? How do they deal with the world they're in? And how do we see the art world in relation to the cycles of, for want of better words, boom and bust? You know, at the moment, there is an argument that the art world is certainly on the commercial side, maybe having a bit of a downturn. And we're seeing galleries close, and we're seeing, in certain cases, opportunities maybe diminish, whereas at the same time, we all know how important museums are to our culture and how important art is generally. So we're going into interesting territory now, I feel.
That was Gregor Muir, Director of Collection at Tate, talking to Monocle's Ryuma Takahashi. And YBA and Beyond, British Art in the 1990s, runs until the 11th of May at the National Arts Centre in Tokyo. And that's all the time we have for today's edition of The Briefing. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producer Angelica Jopson and Ryuma Takahashi. Our researcher was Annalise Maynard and our studio manager Christy O'Grady. The Briefing's back on Monday at the same time, but for now from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you for listening. Have a great weekend.